For centuries, Rome was defined by its ability to recover. Disaster did not weaken it, it sharpened it. When Hannibal crossed the Alps and annihilated Roman legions, Rome did not negotiate, it raised new armies. When civil wars tore the Republic apart, Rome emerged as an empire stronger than any state the Mediterranean had ever seen. Even when emperors were assassinated, rebellions crushed provinces, or plagues swept through cities, the Roman system endured. It adapted, it learned, it came back harder. This is why the 3rd century crisis is so important. Because it was the first time Rome survived, but did not recover. By the early 3rd century, the Roman Empire stood at its greatest territorial extent. From Britain to Mesopotamia, Rome ruled over tens of millions of people. Its roads bound continents together. Its currency fueled trade across 3 seas. Its armies, though stretched thin, were still feared, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The imperial system depended on strong emperors, stable succession, and loyal armies. When those pillars weakened, the entire structure began to tremble. In 235 AD, Emperor Alexander Severus was murdered by his own soldiers. This single act triggered nearly 50 years of chaos. There was no clear system of succession anymore. Emperors were no longer chosen by law, tradition, or Senate approval. They were chosen by whoever controlled the army at that moment. And the army learned a dangerous lesson. If you could make an emperor, you could also destroy one. What followed was an age of blood and instability unlike anything Rome had experienced before. Emperors rose and fell in months. Some ruled for weeks. Most died violently. Civil wars became constant. Entire legions marched against each other, devastating the same provinces they were meant to defend. Farmland was burned, cities looted, and trade routes shattered, not by barbarians, but by Romans themselves. This internal destruction mattered more than any invasion. Rome's strength had always come from unity of purpose. Even during earlier civil wars, the state eventually reasserted control and expanded. But now, the violence was relentless and directionless. There was no vision, no recovery phase, only survival. As Rome fought itself, the world beyond its borders changed. Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube grew larger and more organized. In the east, a new Persian power, the Sassanid Empire, replaced the weak Parthians. Unlike their predecessors, the Sassanids were centralized, aggressive, and ideological rivals of Rome. They did not raid. They invaded. When the Persian king captured Emperor Valerian alive in 260 AD, the shock was immense. A Roman emperor, humiliated and enslaved by a foreign ruler. This was unthinkable. For centuries, Rome had dictated the rules of power. Now, the illusion of invincibility was shattered. By the mid-3rd century, Rome nearly ceased to exist as a single empire. Gaul, Britain, and Spain broke away to form the Gallic Empire. In the east, Palmyra became an independent power under Queen Zenobia. Rome was fragmented, exhausted, and dangerously close to collapse, yet Rome did survive. And this is the paradox. Through sheer force of will, ruthless generals, and desperate reforms, the empire was stitched back together. But the cost of survival was enormous. The Rome that emerged was no longer the Rome that conquered the world. Rome's greatest enemy was never the barbarian. It was the Roman soldier fighting another Roman soldier. Civil war drained Rome in ways no external invasion ever could. Every civil war meant 2 Roman armies destroying each other, trained, expensive, irreplaceable forces. These were not peasants with spears. These were professional soldiers equipped, paid, and trained by the state. When they died, Rome lost decades of military investment in a single battle. Worse still, civil wars devastated the provinces. Armies lived off the land, seizing food, burning crops, and looting towns. Provinces that once funded the empire were reduced to wastelands. Tax revenue collapsed, forcing emperors to raise taxes even higher, which only accelerated economic breakdown. Loyalty shifted away from Rome as an idea and toward individual commanders. Soldiers no longer fought for the empire, they fought for the man who promised higher pay and survival. Emperors became hostage to their own armies. To rule, they had to constantly reward soldiers, even if it meant bankrupting the state. This cycle was fatal. Weak emperors needed army support. Army support required money. money required taxes. Taxes destroyed the economy. A destroyed economy weakened the army, and so the cycle repeated. Unlike earlier periods, Rome no longer had the breathing room to recover. There was always another rebellion, another usurper, another army marching toward Rome. Stability became temporary. Emergency became permanent. By the time order was restored, Rome was exhausted beyond repair. The Roman economy was a complex machine. It relied on trust in currency, trust in trade routes, trust in government stability. The 3rd century crisis destroyed all three. To pay soldiers, emperors debased the currency. Silver coins became bronze coated in silver wash. Inflation exploded. Prices skyrocketed. Merchants refused imperial coinage. Trade reverted to barter. Long-distance commerce collapsed, isolating regions that once depended on imperial markets. Cities, the heart of Roman civilization, began to die. Without trade and security, urban populations declined. Wealthy elites fled to rural estates. Public buildings fell into disrepair. Once thriving forums became silent. The state responded with control, not recovery. Price controls were imposed. Professions became hereditary. Farmers were tied to the land. Tax collectors became feared figures. The Roman state increasingly resembled a survival bureaucracy rather than a prosperous empire. Rome did not become poor overnight, but it lost the economic dynamism that had fueled its expansion. And without prosperity, power becomes fragile. Rome's enemies adapted faster than Rome itself. Germanic tribes learned Roman tactics, weaponry, and organization. Many had served in Roman armies. They knew Rome's weaknesses. They attacked not to raid, but to settle. The Persian Empire attacked with purpose. They aimed to humiliate Rome, not merely defeat it. Their victories inspired others to test Roman defenses. Rome was now reacting, not commanding. Borders became pressure points. Every invasion forced troop transfers, weakening other regions. Rome could no longer defend everything at once. The psychological shift was decisive. Fear of Rome vanished. And when fear disappears, borders collapse. Diocletian and Constantine saved Rome, but they also froze it in place. The empire became authoritarian, rigid, and defensive. Innovation slowed. Local identity replaced Roman identity. The Western Empire, poorer and less urbanized, could not sustain the system. By the time the West fell, the damage had already been done centuries earlier. Rome did not fall, it faded. The 3rd century crisis was the moment Rome crossed a line it could never uncross. It lived on, but the empire that once shaped history became a state struggling not to disappear.